Yates County. Sorry. Was operated as a coal plant from 1937 until it was mothballed in 2011 and then ceased operation. In 2014, Greenwich proposed to restart the dormant coal plant and later proposed to convert it to natural gas with the construction of a 5-mile fracked gas pipeline. In its filings with the Public Service Commission, Greenwich's stated intention was to operate during periods of peak power demand and take pressure off the grid, and during other times when its power, they could bid it competitively into the state's energy markets. Essentially, the intention was for it to operate a few collective weeks a year as a peaker plant. At the time, it was thought that the plant would fill a void left by some of the power sources in the region, expecting to come offline in the coming years, including 3 coal burning plants, Dunkirk, Huntley, and Cayuga, as well as the Fitzpatrick nuclear facility, which does not seem to be planning to come offline anytime soon, unfortunately. In its permit applications, there was never any mention of Bitcoin mining. In September 2016, so this is 5 years ago, DEC granted air and water permits. This is the same air permit we're commenting on in its renewal for the Greenwich facility without what we believe should have been a required environmental impact statement under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. The rationale for granting these permits with no environmental review was that gas was an improvement over coal, they said, even though the plant had been mothballed for years, and the proposal should have been viewed as a brand new project, comparing its emissions to the emissions of having no plant at all there, not this specter of coal. I think that was incredibly unfortunate. In October, a month later, the Committee to Protect the Finger Lakes, Seneca Lake Guardians, and the Sierra Club sought an injunction to block the restarting of the plant, which had been dormant since 2011. And in our lawsuit, we challenged the validity of the plant's air permits, water permits, and lack of seeker review, or at least environmental review. But on each point, the courts deferred to the expertise of the DEC and dismissed the complaints. Outside of the lack of environmental review, many of us felt the injustice of the DEC granting overly generous air and water permits to Greenwich, permissive enough to allow the plant to run every day, even though the application clearly indicated the plant was to run as an intermittent peaker. DEC even gave plant operators years to build the appropriate fish impingement and entrainment mitigations for the millions of gallons of lake water that it would consume daily. And I don't mean to imply that those mitigations are in place. They still have till 2022 to put in the protective screens. We were assured that the plant would use nowhere near their outsized allotment of air pollution and water withdrawals. But once permits were granted, the gas pipeline was built, and the plant was up and running, a very different proposal moved forward. So sometime in 2019, the Greenidge company first floated the idea of running a Bitcoin mining operation at the plant. So for the purposes of this webinar, we won't go into all the intricacies of cryptocurrency and blockchain, which are admittedly difficult and nuanced subjects. But in general, cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, is a digital asset designed to serve as an alternative currency without a third-party validator like a bank or a country, where individual coin ownership records are stored in a computerized database. The technology uses strong cryptography to secure transaction records, control the creation of additional coins, and verify the transfer of coin ownership. While this technology is making some wealthy investors richer, and some forms may hold promise for future beneficial blockchain applications, the process in other forms, like the Bitcoin here at Greenwich, can be incredibly energy intensive and could derail New York's climate goals if not carefully regulated or in some situations banned. For the purposes of commenting on the Title V air permit renewal for Greenwich, it's important to understand that we are focused on the most environmentally pernicious form of cryptocurrency, which is what is called proof of work. Proof of work cryptocurrency, like the Bitcoins being mined at Greenwich, requires creators to expend significant effort solving an arbitrary mathematical puzzle in order to both prevent interlopers from gaming the system and to validate transactions. It is these dense computations that require large and powerful computer banks, which in turn requires a lot of energy. By some estimates, the Bitcoin network consumes as much energy as entire countries like Argentina and Norway. Recently, the Chinese government banned both Bitcoin mining and trading of Bitcoin because the practice is making it difficult for them to reach their greenhouse gas reduction goals. It is estimated that Chinese miners were responsible at one point for about 60% of the 120 terawatts of electricity consumed globally by Bitcoin. That's like the entire energy consumption of a country like New Zealand. And with China rejecting the industry, dormant fossil fuel plants in the US with cheap behind the meter power are becoming targets. Proof of work cryptocurrency is not only an incredible energy hog, it also generates significant quantities of electronic waste. The reason for this is that Bitcoin mining is done with specialized hardware, special purpose hardware, and roughly every year and a half, the computational power of mining hardware doubles, making older machines almost obsolete. This mountain of old hardware has its own climate impacts with potential for water and soil contamination if not recycled properly. Every Bitcoin transaction creates the same e-waste equivalent to discarding your average smartphone, which is mind-blowing to me. Considering that on average, there's about 330,000 Bitcoin transactions every day. It is almost like trashing more than 120 million smartphones a year. You can imagine the incredible e-waste that's created. And I want to stress that the focus of the hearings on October 13th will be about air permits. But I think it's also important to acknowledge the impact that this Bitcoin mine, the impact that it'll have on the waters of Seneca Lake, and how that should be part of the broader secret claims attached to the Title V air permit renewals. Very quickly, per permit, Greenwich is allowed to withdraw up to 139 million gallons of water per day from the lake for cooling purposes and discharge back into the lake up to 134 million gallons of heated water. When Greenwich was just a peaker plant, we challenged the impacts that these excessive water withdrawals would have on fish entrainment and impingement, and the impacts that dumping warmer cooling water back into the lake would have on trout habitat, the growth of harmful algal blooms, which is a tremendous problem in the Finger Lakes, and drinking water quality. And it's clear that using the lake to cool hot computer processor facilities is not consistent with the original permitting and further exacerbates the problem, if indeed this will be another use of the lake. So getting back to the Greenwich timeline, the converted frack gas plant with all its permits has been operating since 2017 as a peaker plant. But in 2019, Greenwich began testing out its cryptocurrency capabilities, expending up to about 1 megawatt of power to mine Bitcoins with miner units they situated within the plant. And I suppose it was successful. Later that year, the Greenwich company quietly filed petitions with the PSC acknowledging that they intend to pursue Bitcoin mining operations attached to the plant, but they expressed that their actions rested on uncertain legal footing, and they asked the Public Service Commission for a declaratory judgment. And they wanted the Public Service Commission to state that they have no authority to regulate Greenwich's use of behind-the-meter electricity to drive a power-hungry Bitcoin mining facility. The petitions asserted that the Bitcoin operation will never interfere with the plant's primary role as a peak demand supplier of wholesale power to the grid. And the PSC washed their hands of further responsibility. They essentially approved that order, and the DEC didn't intervene. So from February 2020 to February 2021, this past year, that 1 year period, Greenwich generated a little under 1,200 Bitcoins from approximately 7,000 mining units, with immediate plans to expand to over 17,000 machines in the latter part of 2021, and perhaps more depending on supply chain issues. And I think that will be an issue for the plant in terms of supply chain. These numbers are approximate. It depends on what they have in their SEC filings and what they say elsewhere. But I believe the ultimate goal is to get to 32,000 miners at 95 megawatts. I mean, the capacity of the plant is 106, I believe. But we believe at that point, they will have far exceeded their permitted emission allowances. In that year I cited, Greenwich Bitcoin mining increased its carbon dioxide emission, its carbon dioxide equivalent emissions tenfold, from 28,000 tons to 234 tons. And that's just at 19 megawatts. That's 13% capacity. Imagine what they will do when they're up at 95 megawatts. We are now at least 41 megawatts of continuous plant operation as they add miners and make new Bitcoins. So we know that they want to ramp up to 55 megawatts by the end of this year. And they've told potential investors that they want to expand the facility and their global interest to 500 megawatts by 2025, presumably at other facilities. So, I think it's difficult to see how they're going to achieve any of this because they're already approaching their annual emissions limit. There is an active lawsuit to stop the expansion of the Greenwich Bitcoin mining facility, though there is uncertainty as to whether the legal action against the town of Torrey, who had signed off on the site plan, has had any effect on the actual plans to move the buildings and the addition of other structure for the facility. Up until about a month ago, with the failure to move a moratorium through the legislature and rubber stamps from the PSC and the DEC, it has felt like we were stuck under the Cuomo administration. But certainly, it feels like things have come unstuck under Governor Hochul. And within a few weeks of Cuomo's resignation, we get this small ray of hope from our DEC commissioner proclaiming that the Bitcoin mining facility may not comply with our climate laws. And the Title V air permit that gets renewed every 5 years may receive some extra scrutiny. And again, the current permit expired September 6th. And we will have further discussion on what this process includes. But I will leave you with the last few thoughts. Greenwich's original Title V air permits were issued without any mention or analysis of Bitcoin mining or the environmental impacts that come with such operations. Air permit renewals should be denied until a full environmental impact assessment is conducted for proof of work cryptocurrency mining facilities and how they relate to our climate laws. Allowing Greenwich to continue an energy consumptive Bitcoin mining facility will establish a precedent that could spread to dozens of other fossil fuel facilities across New York, exempting them as well from complying with our climate laws and threatening air and water quality. And proof of work cryptocurrency mining cannot comply with our climate laws and should not be allowed to mask unwarranted energy consumption with false solutions like burning hydrogen or renewable natural gas or buying carbon offsets, as the Greenwich plant has suggested. We're in the middle of a climate crisis, and every last electron of renewable energy, hydroelectric power, and other forms of low carbon energy should go towards efficiently meeting our climate goals, not diverting renewable energy resources for private profit. So Liz, we'll turn it over to you to kind of talk about the process moving forward with the Title V air permit renewal.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Roger. So hi, everyone. My name is Liz Moran, and I am the New York policy advocate for Earthjustice. So just going to take a moment to go over the timeline and what we know about this process. So some of these pieces of information you're all here and you might be aware of already, but I'll go over the basics. So we're here discussing how to comment for the public hearing that's going to be on October 13th. This is going to be a virtual public hearing, and later on in our presentation, we are going to walk you through how to register for this virtual public hearing. But there will be 2 time slots available, one at 1 p.m. and another at 6 p.m. Another portion of this process is the written comment period. That period ends on October 22nd. So regardless of whether or not you decide to submit written comments, your public comments, what you testify with at the public hearing, will go on the official record towards this permitting process. So of course, it would be great for you to also submit written comments. I'll go over this in a bit, but it'll be very important for us to get as many comments in as possible, both during this hearing and in a written format. But if you can only do one, attending the public hearing is great, and those do go on the record. Regarding the timeline, what happens once our comments are submitted? Unfortunately, the timeline and process on these permits isn't the clearest. Article 5 permitting can be a little confusing, but here's what you really do need to know in this process. The next step that comes is DEC needs to decide if substantive and significant issues have been raised to conduct further review. A lot of this is going to depend on what the DEC decides here, whether or not to issue the permit as is, to modify the permit, or to deny it altogether. So that's all that we're asking you focus on for now, is the fact that we need to make sure we're raising substantive and significant issues regarding this permit, which, as Roger outlined very well, it is really clear that when it comes to this facility and potentially other facilities like it, how it aligns with our state climate goals is going to be a really big issue. It does not appear that at least this type of facility, which is proof of work cryptocurrency mining, can align with the state's climate goals. So let me put this all together for everybody in terms of why we're focused today on this particular facility and how it connects with what's a larger statewide issue and ultimately going to be and is becoming a national issue. So our organizations have gathered together because we do have a statewide goal to get a statewide moratorium on proof of work cryptocurrency mining put in place until a thorough environmental review is conducted. As Roger so nicely outlined, there are a lot of environmental concerns that come with proof of work cryptocurrency mining in particular. Of course, the climate concerns are top of mind for many people. The energy consumption of this industry is deeply concerning, but that's not the only thing we have to worry about. Roger also outlined the electronic waste concerns that come with this practice, which can lead to toxicity and additional water quality threats. The amount of water use and the heating of the water is another concern. So these are just an example of a few things that would really benefit from a thorough environmental review. Now, who can do this? Who are we asking to do this? Governor Hochul. The governor's position in New York State has a lot of power. The governor controls our state agencies and has other executive powers and authority that enable the governor. So Governor Hochul has the power here to give us what we want. Now, where does this facility come into the picture? Well, of course, it's the first test for New York State. This is one of the first permits up for play. And Greenwich isn't the only facility out there that was like a former coal plant or gas plant that may end up looking to convert to Bitcoin mining. So what we're seeing with Greenidge is the first test for how New York State will approach the issue of proof of work cryptocurrency mining and its connection with the New York State climate law, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or as you see in the slide, the CLCPA. So since this is the first test here, we're going to need a lot of comments because this is going to be the precedent-setting decision for New York State. It's not the only one to come. Some of you may be familiar. There's a facility out in Western New York in North Tonawanda that'll also be up for public comment in the near future. But this is the first one. We've played this game before. For those of you who have joined us, who might be familiar with the fights against the dam scammer power plant in the Hudson Valley or the Astoria power plant out in Queens, you're aware that this is a part of a larger fight. Astoria and dam scammer are part of a larger fight to make sure we don't expand our reliance upon fossil fuels, to make sure that we meet our climate goals. And this is in a similar vein. This is going to be a precedent-setting decision for how the state responds to this particular type of Bitcoin mining and how it can align with our climate goals. So just picture this as part of a bigger piece of the puzzle and why it's so important that regardless of whether or not you live in the Finger Lakes or near the Finger Lakes or anywhere near this facility, this is something that ultimately does impact you because it sets the stage for the rest of the state. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kate to help us walk through how to register for this event. So I'm going to pause sharing and I'll share again in a moment.
Someone's going to have to share the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm going to share it right now, Kate. I'm just getting to the right tab.
Okay. Unfortunately, I am a bit of a technological Luddite, and so I'm relying on Liz to share the screen to show how you can register for these lovely hearings.
So that should be up now, Kate, the DEC website. So we can start from there.
I'm not seeing it.
Not up, Liz.
It's not up?
It's dark.
It's a dark screen. Any luck this time?
Nope.
Weird, it says you've started screen sharing, but we just see that sentence and then a black screen. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. But
I mean, it's good to know. I don't know why that's happening per se. I'm selecting the correct tab. How about, is anything showing up at this point?
Nope.
How about sharing a particular application instead of your screen?
Yeah, unfortunately for the purposes of what we're trying to show everyone, that doesn't help.
Okay.
But thank you. Kate, why don't you, I'm going to put the link in the chat for where on DEC's website people can find this information. Why don't we just verbally walk people through while maybe I take some screenshots and we can share it that way.
Okay. Well, basically, when you go to the Greenwich, the DEC website, you're going to go to the environmental notice bulletin, which is, you'll go to the public involvement section on the DEC website, and which is at the bottom of the DEC website. It says public involvement. And then you'll go to the environmental notice bulletin. And I can't remember exactly which it could be. You know, I don't know how many, if they've got a cutoff, that could be.
We can also share, I see some questions in the chat about, you know, maybe a walkthrough for how to register. So we'll send instructions, and Alex mentioned talking points as well via email to everyone after this, along with some contact info for DEC. DEC can help people register where necessary. So for example, for people who are trying to register for both portions, maybe calling DEC can help sort that out.
And now I'm supposed to turn it over to Alex Beecham from Food and Water Watch.
Great, thank you. Cool. This can be really brief, I think. Liz, weirdly, it's back to a dark screen again. I don't know what's going on.
I'm wondering, are two people sharing at once? Because I think under the settings, there's only one participant can share at a time. I wasn't sure if maybe Roger was sharing with at the same time.
No, it's still linked as one participant can share at a time. So
I don't know why. I think
So
this is,
Roger listed as the host. So
this is
Roger
a
listed
my
as the host.
issue thing on my end. I don't know why, because it's when I'm trying to share that it's going black. I don't
Oh,
know why
weird.
that's the case.
Here, I can try to do it. Would that help?
Yes, thank you, Alex.
Now you can see the embarrassing number of tabs I have open. Okay. You guys see that?
Yes.
Here, I'll put it in presentation view a bit. Okay.
You
That
may
worked?
want to go to one slide before that, Alex, but it's up
Yeah.
to you.
No, I do. Yeah, thank you. Cool. So this will be short. So I think I know a whole bunch of people on this call and was really excited to see so many of you here. But for those that I maybe haven't met, I'm Alex Beecham. I'm the Northeast Region Director at Food and Water Watch, and I'm calling from my home in Brooklyn. So the first thing to know about a public hearing is that it's called a public hearing for a reason, right? We don't call these expert hearings or scientist hearings or policy wonk hearings. The point of these really is for the state, and in this case, the DEC, to hear from everyday New Yorkers about what they think about this power plant, right? And so I think that's really important to know, because I think folks can get a little intimidated and think you need the absolute perfect argument, or maybe you feel like you don't know enough about this plant. And we've really got to just kind of get out of that mindset, right? You don't need to be an expert. And in fact, our power in this isn't really about making the exact correct argument, right? So if you just think about it, if we thought we could win this fight or any fight by simply being right, you kind of wouldn't need to have a bunch of people at a public hearing, right? We'd just go in and have someone make the perfect argument, and that would be that. Of course, that isn't the way the world works. And really, despite this being a DEC hearing, this is going to be a political decision for Governor Hochul, like so many other things she decides. And so to me, it's much less about what we say and much more about the power we project, because at the end of the day, she's going to decide whether or not to keep this power plant, to let it keep burning fossil fuels, to ludicrously power this Bitcoin mining operation. And that decision is basically going to be, are the opponents of this more powerful than the supporters? Do I have to worry more about the opponents than the supporters? And so this hearing is one of the main ways that we can both project, but really demonstrate our power by just having person after person after person say that you've got to deny the Title V air permit and you've got to shut this thing down. So I think that's the first thing to know. A couple quick tips here to make it even less intimidating is that this is super short, right? So you have 3 minutes. You've got to keep what you're saying pretty simple and brief, and in some ways that makes it easier because you can't write a long opus because you don't have time to deliver it. And then the other thing that goes along with not needing to be an expert is that, to me, the most powerful testimonies are people who speak from the heart, who have a personal reason, right? So perhaps you are worried, as I am, about the future that we might leave our kids, and that if we don't drastically slash emissions now, I'm worried, right, that my son will inherit a world that's not really all that similar to the one that we've all enjoyed. And that seems horrible. and it seems incumbent upon all of us to make sure that doesn't happen, right? So that was essentially what I just said was almost my testimony from the Dan Scammer hearing last week, right? So that is as simple as it can be. So keep it simple. That said, we have some sample talking points. So I'll run through these really quickly. So first, and importantly, you should tell them your name, where you live. I think in this instance, they'll probably have a list of the speakers, but sometimes, just so you know, there will be a court reporter here. And so sometimes they'll ask you to spell your name because they want to get it right for the official record. In the last few virtual hearings I've been in, and I've spent a lot of time in power plant virtual hearings over the last couple months, they've not really done that because they have the list, because you had to sign up through the kind of slightly too arduous process that we just went through. So say your name, where you're from, and put the demand at the top, right? Which is you want the DEC to deny the Article 5 permit or the Title 5 air permit for the Greenwich facility. So the second point here is just that you're concerned about the enormous increases in greenhouse gas emissions, and you could add in there why you're worried about greenhouse gas emissions. The reasons are legion. And then going more in depth that this cannot comply with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. As Liz just went through, we have a real opportunity to set a precedent here. This could be the tip of the iceberg. And so we need the state to make the right decision and say, this doesn't comply with the CLCPA. And then if and when that happens, it makes the next fight all the easier. And there's going to be not one, but several next fights just on the Bitcoin front or cryptocurrency front. And then more emission stuff at the end. I won't read all the way through them, but so we'll send these talking points out to everybody, and then also the information on how to register, because I know that can be like, it always seems like one step too much to do the WebEx thing, but once you're in there, it is not difficult and unintimidating to give testimony. I guess the only last thing I'd say about this is that in addition to not being difficult, I've found it incredibly empowering the last few power plant hearings I've participated in, because you have to wait a while until they get to your name, right? And on the Dan Skimmer hearing last week, the same thing at Astoria earlier, the same thing at the previous Dan Skimmer hearings. It's just kind of incredible to hear one New Yorker after another going through their reasons for opposing these things. And it's kind of funny to me because they're all facilities that I've been working on and know about, but hearing kind of one person after another talk about their lives and how this would affect them, I think has just been really empowering to hear. And then I believe this will be the case with Greenidge as well. There's also something about hearing sort of a 10-to-1 ratio, right? Where there's almost no one on the other side of this issue, right? And I assume this will be the case in our upcoming hearing as well, where the margin is just dramatic, and there's something kind of cool to hear that and sort of experience it in real time. And that's kind of the whole point of this, right? The other side is powerful, but they don't have people, right? So in some ways, this fight and so many of these fights are going to boil down to whether our people are more powerful than the other side's tiny number of people, but large amount of money. And that's in some ways what this entire thing is going to boil down to, and what I think all the power plant fights boil down to. So I probably talked too long there, but join the hearing. It's going to be great. And I guess I should stop sharing my screen. And then I'm not sure what's next. Do I take it back to Yvonne? Great.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really hoping that this is as clear as mud for most of you. I know that we're gonna, we're recording this. We'll send this recording out, and we'll also send along talking points. But I just want to thank all of our speakers. We have Roger, Kate, Caitlin, Liz, Alex, and Tony here, all contributing their inordinate wisdom with us tonight. And I know there have been some questions that have been submitted in the chat box. And so I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin, and we'll have our question and answer period now.
Thanks. So I'm just there were a few things I think just about the testimony format, or I had copy and pasted. Someone had asked, is it going to be audio only, or will there be a chance to share any visuals?
I suspect that answer is no. But when you call, if you have to, if you're interested in calling DEC to register, I would suggest asking if that's something that you want to do, though I suspect that won't be the case. I personally haven't seen any of these hearings provide the opportunity for members of the public to share visuals as they present. What I would recommend is if anyone is interested in visuals or there's some sort of text element to what you want to speak about, send that as written comments to DEC. You could always include attachments, anything that's submitted as a written comment goes on the record. So that's another opportunity to share that sort of information.
Great, thanks, Liz. That really kind of catapults into what someone had said. It's important to remind everyone of the ability to submit written statements. And I think you said before the statements are due October 22nd.
That's exactly right.
Okay. All right. So this was also just a general statement. It says not really a question. People need to know that they don't have to go into the weeds about what Bitcoin or proof of work crypto mining is. This is a hearing about the Title V air permits. So just that reminder, but and also another technical thing, are the slides going to be shared with folks?
We could actually make them a little more comprehensive, but we could share some slides, the relevant ones.
Okay, so one of the first questions is how can we get more young people involved?
Wow.
That was mine, and it's very big pause here.
We're just trying to figure out who can answer what because there's a few of us.
I have an idea.
Go ahead,
If
Yvonne.
anybody has any 20-something-year-old relatives, friends, family, we would love to get them to do a TikTok video and a challenge to help educate and talk to their parents or investors in Bitcoin or proof of work cryptocurrency, and hope to get it to go viral.
Yeah, climate change affects our next generation.
There was a question, is there a significant difference between attending the upcoming meeting or adding comments on the DEC website? And I know from other hearings I've been to, they always say that the same amount of weight is added both in the public testimony and the written comments. So if you can't attend the hearing, definitely submit written comments. They say that they have the same weight.
But I think like Alex said, I mean, you know, we hope that everyone will contribute to participating because there is a feeling, a vibe that the DEC gets when it's completely overwhelming at the hearing and everyone is against the proposal or the renewal in this case.
The youth issue, if anybody has a high school with an environmental club and an advisor, you might contact them, and some of those youth might like to participate in the public hearing. Be a good experience for them.
So that's a great point. There are some questions that deal with some of the question. I think it was from when Roger was presenting towards the beginning, more about like Bitcoin specifically. I don't know if you want me to go into those questions or focus more on some of the other more technical thing, or like Maura Stevens, for example, says how many individual jobs exist or are likely to exist at Greenwich?
Well, my point was the electricians union that was opposing anything that would impact on Greenwich. I think that it impacted on some of the decisions DEC was making in the past. I don't know how we can address that going forward.
Well, basically, once the miners are installed or the infrastructure is installed, these things are so easily taken in and replaced. I mean, it doesn't take an electrician to replace a miner. It's a specious argument. There are not going to be huge there's not going to be huge job creation for electrician unions at Greenwich. Yeah, that argument is manufactured, really.
Is a very common question and talking point that comes up, though, and we can include some follow-up information about the myth that this is a job creator, because that's just not, as Kate just articulated, that has not been the case, nor do we anticipate it to be the case.
At most, it would be initially construction workers if they're actually putting together another building. Maybe there would be wires run initially, but as far as the miners, the servers, they're pretty much, if one breaks down, another's plugged in. It's not as though you need an electrician to do it, so.
Sorry, go ahead. All right, does anyone here actually think the DEC would rule correctly? Why would we ask for environmental review when we already know they won't conceivably pass review? Why don't we just demand that they shut it down?
I think the answer is simple. Had they known what they approved years ago, it would not have been approved.
So I think that there is a good chance we could get an environmental review process here. Roger shared that screenshot earlier of the tweet from DEC Commissioner Basil Sagos, indicating that this facility in their eyes has not provided any indication that it would align with the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act goals of New York State. So I think that's a really important indication. So I think that there's a good chance we can have the agency weigh in the way we'd want to see them weigh in on this particular project. And I think we've got a good shot at this, especially if everyone weighs in here. Like just this evening, we have at a peak had 85 people on this call. And now imagine if everyone here reaches out to 5 to 10 people. That's a great start. I think the more of us that speak out, the better our chances are of getting a thorough environmental review and putting a stop to proof of work cryptocurrency mining. I think an environmental review in particular is important here, rather than asking for an outright ban on Bitcoin mining or proof of work. So that we can give things a fair shake, right? Like maybe there is a way to have this be less energy consumptive and be renewable. Someone asked about proof of stake, which is a different type of Bitcoin mining that consumes way less energy. So the state should have the opportunity to explore this in a fair way.
I will say for this process, I mean, it is really rare for the DEC to come out and have a public comment period for what is largely seen as ministerial and rubber stamping. If a Title V air permit, if they don't perceive that anything has changed, they let it go. And we've seen this kind of thing before when there were Bakken crude oil trains, rolling through New York and transloading at the Port of Albany. There was an air permit renewal there too that wasn't substantially going to change aspects of the air permit, but DEC held that air permit up for years with public comments and because they knew it was an issue and a problem and they wanted to get a handle on it. I think many of us sort of get the indication from the Hochul administration that they really want to do something here and do something positive. And I think sometimes to make a huge policy shift, they also need to drum up public support. They can't do these things in vacuums and then get attacked by the unions or get attacked by the fossil fuel industry. So, I think that's another reason to participate in that. I believe we are supporting the Hochul administration in doing something substantive here.
There were 2 questions in terms of current permits. So can we focus on what we can actually do regarding greenhouse gases related to the current permit? And someone else asked, what about acid rain permits?
We are privileged to have Tony Ingraffia on, and I would love to hear his take on what a process would look like about upstream emissions and, how DEC can sort of derivate from their usual course and do something significant here, or any other thoughts and comments he had. I apologize for not mentioning the acid rain permits. I think, I think that they are worth looking at. They're also up for renewal, but they're very technical, and that there are other issues at stake here. We're really looking at what has changed in the past 5 years, and that is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And I think it calls into question all large fossil fuel burning facilities and the impact that their emissions have on the climate. CLCPA does have a criteria pollutant section. So it's not just about, carbon, it is about, and in this case, it would be SOx, it would be things that contribute to acid rain. But I think for these permits, they're a little more technical, and I think it's a little more nuanced. It's difficult to talk about in terms of public action. And we're still working through that with our attorneys. But yes, those permits are up as well and will be subject to the hearing. We don't quite have the same talking points there yet, so we're focusing on the air permits. But I don't know if Tony is still on.
Yes, I'm here, and I would be glad to try to answer a couple of the questions that came up if somebody gives me permission to screen share.
All right, let's see. It'll take me just a moment, but I think I can do it.
Those are excellent questions. And by the way, this has been a very good briefing so far.
Well, it's about to get better.
Well, I'm going to try to give you all some technical data that you can use to embellish the suggested comments. Alex suggested comments were excellent, but if you add some numbers into them, I think they'd be even more powerful.
So Tony, I just gave you permission. I don't know if you have, I made you a co-host. There you go.
Good.
Yep.
Okay, so the last question about will DEC ask Greenidge to include upstream methane emissions? Okay, first, I'm going to answer that question in two parts. First of all, what is the difference between including and not including upstream methane emissions? So the current permit allows Greenidge to emit, as I put here, 582,525 metric tons per year of CO2e. The renewal is asking for the same amount, but that does not include upstream methane emissions. If they include upstream methane emissions, by their own calculations, verified by Renee Santoro and me, by Greenidge's own calculations, the emissions taking into account CLCPA requirements of including upstream methane would jump to 952,000 metric tons, an increase of 63%.
Can you just quickly define what upstream means for those?
Yeah, okay. So there are two ways that methane comes into the picture. One is when you actually burn methane at the plant. Is there methane emitted through leakage or some aspect of what they call inside the fence line? Think of the fence line as the fence around the facility. Is there any methane that leaks into the atmosphere from inside that facility? Yes, but it's minuscule. There's very little. Upstream means, is there any methane leaked into the atmosphere unburned outside the fence line? That is, somebody goes and drills a well in the Marcellus, that rock behind me, down in Pennsylvania. They drill the well, they stimulate the well, they produce the gas, it gets compressed, it gets dehumidified, it goes into a pipeline, goes into a storage facility, goes into a distribution pipeline into the fence line. That's upstream. And it turns out that upstream emissions of methane, as you're hearing about all over the place nowadays, are very significant. So, according to CLCPA law, one must include upstream methane emissions in CO2e calculations. And if you do, and Greenidge has actually run this calculation, is the second part of my answer. You get 952,000 metric tons, which is a 60% increase over their current allowable. But here's the catch. And Earthjustice attorneys are onto this. Hi, Liz. Greenidge is claiming they're immune from the CLCPA law because they're only applying for a renewal and not a new permit. I'm not an attorney. I can't comment on whether that's true or not, but with a straight face, Greenidge can't claim that they're doing everything to be in accord with CLCPA and then claim that they're not in accord with CLCPA because they're ignoring upstream methane emissions. So for those of you who are looking at the suggested comments from Alex, one of them was along the lines of there have been substantial increases in CO2 emissions at the plant. Well, yeah, not only in the last 5 years or 3 years as they ramped up their cryptocurrency operations, but they will continue to ramp up as they use more and more natural gas up to a point where they're using that entire facility capacity, 106 megawatts, 24/7, 365. And at that point, they will exceed their current permit by 63%. Another suggested comment that Alex showed was, what's the equivalent of the emissions to the number of cars on the road? That's a good one. But for those of you who live in Tompkins County, like me, another comparison is this. What is the total CO2 emission from the entire county, Tompkins County, 105,000 residents? How much CO2e is emitted in the county from all sources? About the same as the emissions from the Greenidge plant when it goes into full-scale operation. There's a scaling for you. That one facility will emit as much CO2e into the atmosphere as 105,000 people doing everything they do throughout the year in Tompkins County. I hope those two numbers are useful.
Thank you, Tony.
I have a couple of other suggested things that you might talk about. Again, as was pointed out at the beginning of this interaction, we have to show DEC substantive things that DEC is concerned about. DEC is not concerned about employment. It's substantive to us. It's not substantive to DEC. So here are some other things that they would be sensitive to. Offsets. The CLCPA says a lot about offsets. For those of you who don't know, an offset is a purchase of greenies, good feelings. In other words, Greenidge buys $1 million worth of somebody else's good work in reducing their emissions so that Greenidge can continue their own emissions. It's like asking forgiveness for your sins by paying for indulgences. Those of you who aren't Catholic won't understand what the hell I'm talking about. Anyway, sorry about that. But so Greenidge claims that they're spending $1 million a year to offset their emissions. They're buying somebody else's green credits so that they can continue to emit. Here are a series of problems with that. Number one, they're not paying for methane emissions because they claim that the methane emissions are irrelevant. Number two, carbon offsets are meant to be used by an entity when there is no other possible way to reduce their emissions themselves. There are many ways in which Greenidge can reduce its emissions. And I'll get to those ways in a minute. Three, carbon offsetting is a delaying tactic. They're saying, let us keep doing what we're doing. Somebody will pay for somebody else to do good. We're not going to do good. But the point is, we're running out of time. Everybody has to do good. Another way of saying that is in New York State, we're trying to get to zero emissions, zero. Not net zero, zero. So an offset increasingly makes no sense because who's going to sell an offset to Greenidge when nobody has any emissions to sell? The whole process just falls apart. And finally, and this goes back to the work that Earthjustice and Alex and Mandy are doing, if you read the fine print of the CLCPA, and believe me, there's a lot of fine print, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm just going to highlight a couple of points for you. According to CLCPA, one may not use carbon offsetting in the electricity generation sector. Now, Greenidge is talking out of both sides of its mouth. And on the one hand, they claim that they're not a public serving electric utility. They're a behind the meter private utility, and therefore they're not really part of the electric generation sector. On the other hand, they go about saying, but wait a minute, we're selling electricity to the grid. We're serving thousands and thousands of homes in Yates County and the surrounding by selling our electricity. Okay, either they are or they aren't, and that's for the lawyers to decide. I'm just pointing out this confusion, and there's inconsistency or maybe even hypocrisy on their point. Read farther down. If you're not an electric generation facility, if you're a commercial facility, which is what they claim they are, a private commercial facility, any greenhouse gas emission offset project approved by the DEC shall be designed to provide discernible benefit to the environment rather than to the source. What is the discernible benefit to the environment in emitting CO2e from a private enterprise that is only benefiting its source? Next, if you find someone who is willing to buy your offset dollars, it has to be located in the same county and within 25 miles of your facility. So if you know somebody in Yates County within 25 miles of the facility that will take $1 million or more a year from Greenidge, so that they, the entity getting the $1 million, reduces their emissions accordingly, go for it. But good luck. And finally, DEC has to find that there is an enhancement of the conditions of the ecosystem or geographic area that is not adversely affected. And finally, again, DEC has to find that this process of buying and selling credits will substantially reduce or prevent the generation or release of pollutants through the source reduction. They're not saying they're going to reduce, they're just saying they're offsetting. So this is where DEC lawyers and earth justice lawyers and you, the private public citizens, need to get on board and say, DEC, figure it out, but you can't wait 5 years. You can't renew this permit now for 5 more years and then figure it out over the next 5 years, because 5 years from now is almost 2030. Should I go on, or do you want me to stop at this point?
Why don't we get a few more questions? But that's
Okay.
so illuminating. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a handful of questions left. There was one, is there any coordination plan so that people hit on a diversity of issues?
So we haven't done anything where we're coordinated for at least the hearing comments, like who should testify on what. I think this is an opportunity for people to touch upon issues that resonate with them personally. So there will be a lot of people commenting, a lot of areas will end up being touched, but the other opportunity to hit a lot of different areas is through the written comment period process. Tony just provided us with a lot of different talking points that'll be worthwhile to expand upon in written comments. For those of you who are part of organizations, your organizations may have the opportunity to sign on to organizational sign-on letters to DEC. So that's one opportunity to engage. So those are some of the ways that we will be able to hit upon these various issues and get them all communicated to DEC.
Wonderful.
All right, I'm sorry, but I've been listening to this and I've been involved in this for some time now. And I have a few very basic comments. First off, we should move away from the Bitcoin piece and talk about a commercial operation. It's a commercial for the DEC and their air permits. they're talking about a commercial operation. And my point has been all along, had they acknowledged a commercial operation, they would never have gotten these permits. Second piece is that all New York State, the federal government is declining all these permits. Why should we allow this to happen?
Thank you, Gary. Someone said, do all of the megawatt hours used by the computers wind up as heat? Has anyone modeled how this may create warm spots or plumes of warm water in Seneca Lake? I think there was some talk in the chat, but I didn't know if anyone else wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question entirely. In fact, I don't, at this point, I think that there are some, I'm not sure if they plan to use the lake to cool I mean, they haven't actually expanded. I don't know if lake water is going to play a role in the cooling of the miners, but I don't know. Tony, do you know anything about the specs on that?
No, I haven't looked into that.
Yeah. I mean, but we do know that they, take 130 something million gallons of water to cool the turbines, and that they have the intake pipe at a very shallow part of the lake, and that it is so shallow that if they put wedge wire screens on it to protect the fish, they can't get enough water, and that it's an engineering problem. It's something that should have been identified immediately, and DEC has given them many years to try to solve the problem. They still haven't solved the problem, and this plant is still largely sucking in fish eggs, fish larvae, unmitigated. They have until 2022 to come up with some kind of plan. I guess they're currently studying it, but it is a problem. And I think with the harmful algal blooms that are happening through other means, through nutrient loading, through climate change, through warmer summers, adding hot cooling water back into the lake certainly isn't helping.
Yeah, they basically create chum screens, I mean, it's basically a whirlpool creating chum, and then they kick back hot water to, it's disgusting. It's, if you wanted to create shark bait, this is what the plant does.
Thank you, Kate. I see that Joseph has his hand raised. And so I think Liz was saying perhaps we ask Joseph can wrap us up with this last question, and then we can all wrap up after that. So.
Yes, it wasn't actually a question. It was a response to the last. They're not using the lake to cool the Bitcoin mining rigs. The Bitcoin mining rigs are air cooled, which is one of the problems that the area residents in Dryden, or Dresden rather, and Abby will back me up on this. They're very loud and they run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The thermal discharges from the plant, yes, they could be contributing to harmful algal blooms in the Dresden Bay area, but we can't prove that. And I'd like to go back to what I said earlier. This is what we're talking about here are Title IV acid rain and Title V air emissions permits. If you get off topic, the DEC is going to basically just say, take that comment and throw it in the trash because it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about here. So in the past, we've seen that you have to be on topic, and we're talking about air emissions. And Tony, by the way, you look great tonight. If you could share some of the information that you have, and we also have some new information, basically from Greenidge, that talks about their air emissions, you know, and we'd like to share that information as well before people compose their comments. Sign up to make a comment in person. Follow up with a written comment. The more the EC hears from us, the better. And thank you all, by the way, for putting on this very informative webinar.
Thanks so much, Joe. And thank you all so much for coming. I'll turn it over to Yvonne to close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much to all the presenters, all the great comments and questions, and most importantly, thanks to all of you for taking the time to go through this and get prepared. It's going to take all of us. Invite your friends, register as soon as you can to speak at the hearings. If the sooner you register, that moves you up in the queue, so you won't be there forever waiting. And I just am grateful that you're all willing to lend your voice to this incredibly important issue. So with that, I wish you all a wonderful evening, and thanks again.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.